I'm a Soviet researcher, and for over 40 years, I've seen lots of horrible things. But nothing terrified me more than when I saw the first Yeti. What started as a military expedition immediately turned into a nightmare. And when I finally learned what had been hiding under the mountain all those decades, it made every previous story about the Yeti sound cute. The station had been abandoned for 11 years, deep in a stretch of the eastern Siberian range that didn't appear on civilian maps, and within 30 minutes of unpacking, Dr. Sorokin found the first elk carcass behind the supply shed, or what was left of it, which was mostly the lower half of the spine. The snow around it was disturbed in a radius of about 15 feet. No drag marks leading away. Whatever had done it had simply lifted the carcass clear of the ground and carried it elsewhere, eating as it moved. Marov, our lead escort, looked at each scene for a long time without speaking. He met my eyes when he clicked the radio off, and what I saw in his face was not reassurance. That was the first night. The Yeti came for us on the second. Alexei was setting the perimeter lights when the blizzard rolled in from the northwest. He had maybe 40 yards of open ground between the station's east wall and the tree line, and the wind had come up fast enough that by the time any of us noticed the light conditions had dropped, we couldn't see the tree line anymore from the windows. His job was supposed to take 8 minutes. After 20, Marov's jaw was set and his hand was on his radio. After 25, he sent 2 men out with a rope line strung between them, following the perimeter wire back toward the last known stake. They found the perimeter lights still on their stakes, still wired, still running. They found Alexei's boot prints ending in a churn of disturbed snow about 10 yards from the last stake. Something had come out of the trees fast and horizontal, hit Alexei broadside, and taken him back the way it came without losing a step. The displacement in the snow showed a Yeti's stride, that wide, flat-footed bipedal gait, continuing uninterrupted back into the tree line, just heavier going in than coming out. The rope team followed the drag trail into the trees for about 60 feet before they stopped. Alexei was hanging upside down from a pine that was at least 40 feet tall, suspended from a branch that should have required a ladder and a harness to reach. His throat had been crushed, not cut, not torn open, but compressed with such focused force that the hyoid bone was pulverized and the trachea had collapsed entirely. The branch showed no signs of a rope or a mechanism. The bark wasn't even torn. Whatever the Yeti had done, it had done it with its hands, reaching up to that branch and setting Alexei there the way a hawk drops a mouse onto a fence post, with the casual economy of something that did this as a matter of course. The rope team came back without speaking. Marov told us what they'd found in a flat, factual voice while the wind shook the station walls and the perimeter lights swung in the dark outside, still faithfully running, illuminating 40 yards of empty snow. Nobody slept after that. The next morning was clear and sharp and 31 degrees below zero, and we found the second set of tracks circling the station in a complete loop. The same 22-inch impressions, same gait pattern, same depth, which the biomechanics of that depth in that density of snowpack suggested a weight of somewhere between 600 and 800 pounds. The loop was tight, maybe 12 feet from the walls. The Yeti had walked the entire perimeter of the station overnight, and we had not heard it. That was the thing that hit me hardest, that kept cycling through my thoughts as I photographed the tracks in the early light. Something that heavy, moving that close, and we hadn't heard a sound. No creak of snow, no snap of a frozen branch, nothing. The tracks circled us completely and then led back to the tree line with the same unhurried, flat-footed regularity, as though whatever made them simply wanted to know the shape of the thing we'd built and now occupied. We lost Dr. Pavelev on the third day. We were moving between the station and the secondary storage building, a distance of about 90 feet in a group of 7 with 3 armed escorts flanking us. The whiteout had come back and the visibility was under 20 feet. Pavelev was directly behind me, close enough that I could hear him breathing. I turned around when I heard the snow compress differently, a heavier sound, a vast lateral shift of weight. And there was a shape in the white, something enormous and dark moving parallel to us at speed, and then Pavelev was gone. I heard him scream twice, the sound cutting left and then dropping below the wind, and then there were 2 gunshots from one of the escorts, and then nothing. Marov's team searched for 20 minutes before the wind got too dangerous. They found Pavelev's glove. They found blood in the snow in a pattern consistent with something being dragged at a run. They found one of the Yeti's tracks, a single impression where it had planted its foot to change direction, and the depth of that impression was nearly 4 inches deeper than any we'd measured before, meaning it had been moving at a sprint when it hit him. We never recovered Pavelev's body. The attacks after that were relentless and methodical, and the methodology of them was what frightened me most. The Yeti wasn't hunting randomly. It destroyed our satellite uplink antenna during the second night. The mounting bracket was twisted off its base with bare hands. The dish itself found 30 yards from the station, folded in half like a sheet of paper. It targeted the snowmobiles next. 3 of our 4 vehicles were found with their fuel lines pulled free and their starter mechanisms crushed. Not torn off. Crushed with a grip, the metal showing the individual channel impressions of fingers around the housing. It tore the bait station we'd rigged 200 yards from camp completely out of the ground, chain anchor and all, and left it stacked neatly against the station's front wall as though returning something that belonged to us. Our tripwires were never triggered. Our motion sensors logged activations in irregular patterns that our tech specialist couldn't reconcile. Too many triggers, too close together, as though multiple sources were moving around the sensor's detection edges simultaneously. The Yeti always attacked from upwind. It always attacked the isolated individual, and it was always pushing us in the same direction, uphill, northeast, toward the ridge that formed the mountain's secondary face. We stopped going outside for anything non-essential after Grigoriev disappeared during a routine equipment check on day 5. By then, we had 4 researchers and 2 escorts left from the original 12. Marov had barricaded the main doors and set a watch rotation, but the Yeti had already demonstrated that doors meant little to it. We found the claw marks in the steel of the east entrance on day 3, 4 deep parallel gouges pressed into the door at a height of about 7 feet. The metal actually deformed inward as though tested for weakness. The gouges were 3/8 of an inch deep in cold-rolled steel. On day 4, we found a tripwire dismantled and coiled neatly beside the stake it had been anchored to, not triggered, dismantled. The Yeti had located the wire in the dark, traced it to its anchor points, and removed it without activating the mechanism. The motion sensors had logged something at that location at 2:14 a.m., a single activation and then nothing. And when I mapped all the sensor logs against the tripwire and bait station positions, it was clear that the Yeti, or Yetis, because I was no longer certain we were dealing with one, had systematically surveyed every trap we'd set before deciding what to do with each one. The bait station destruction was almost contemptuous. We'd rigged a deer carcass on a chain anchor sunk 2 feet into the permafrost, the kind of anchor designed to hold a light aircraft in a crosswind. The chain was gone. The anchor was gone. The carcass was gone. The Yeti had pulled the entire assembly straight up out of frozen ground, as though removing a tent stake, and left the bait station equipment stacked against the front wall of the station, returned, organized, a message as clear as anything written in language. We see what you are doing, and we are not impressed. The avalanche came at 3 in the morning on day 6. It was small by the standards of the range, but it hit the northeast corner of the station and took out roughly 12 feet of the upper exterior wall, filling the corner room with about 2 tons of snow and ice and ending any possibility of staying in place. We had to move. We had exactly 1 working snowmobile, not enough fuel to reach the valley, and a compass heading that the Yeti had been systematically pushing us toward for 6 days. We went northeast, uphill, into the mountain. The cave entrance was at 9,400 feet, partially concealed by a rock overhang that made it nearly invisible until you were standing directly in front of it. It was too regular to be natural, the edges too uniform, the floor too level just inside the threshold. Marov swept his light across the entrance and found the Yeti's tracks going in, and found our dead escort Danilov's radio clipped to a rock shelf just inside the mouth, placed there deliberately. The Yeti leading us here with a breadcrumb trail of our own dead. We had nowhere else to go. The blizzard was coming back. We went in. The cave dropped for about 200 feet before it leveled out, and then the walls changed. Concrete, bolted steel supports, Soviet-era construction, unmistakable. The same institutional gray-green paint on the support struts. the same warning signage in that particular Cyrillic block font that the USSR used for industrial facilities from the late 1950s onward. The tunnel complex spread out ahead of us in a branching network that stretched far beyond what our lights could reach. The ceiling was about 9 feet at the main junction, dropping lower in the branch tunnels. It smelled of machine oil and something else. Wet, organic, animal. A smell of enclosed living spaces that hadn't been ventilated in years. The first chamber we found held equipment. 3 Soviet-era flamethrowers still racked on their original mounts. Fuel canisters beside them, corroded but present. 2 of them worked. We took them without discussion. The second chamber held the containment cells, 8 of them, set into the right wall of a secondary tunnel, each one roughly 10 feet by 10 feet with bars that were 3/4-inch steel at 6-inch intervals. 5 of the cells had been opened from the inside, the bars bent outward with the casual force of something that simply leaned into the obstacle until it gave. The floors of those 5 cells held bone piles. Not human bones, large animal bones, mostly elk, and what looked like mountain sheep, stacked against the back walls. Nesting material. The cells had not been used to hold creatures. They had been lived in. The journals were in a sealed metal case in what had been the facility's command room, and Sorokin broke the case open and read while Marov and I kept watch at the door. The project had run from 1962 to 1979. The Soviet researchers had not been trying to capture a Yeti. They had been trying to contain a colony that the initial survey team had discovered when they broke through into the lower cave system during construction of the upper tunnel network. The initial survey report, dated June 1962, described a finding of 7 adult specimens and estimated juveniles. The researchers had watched through a breach in the cave wall for 6 hours before retreating, and their language in the report was extraordinary in its flatness, the prose of people trying very hard to describe something that broke their framework for the world. The Yetis had been observed sharing food. They had been observed in what the report clinically termed coordinated acoustic behavior, the researchers' phrase for what was, reading between the lines, singing, not territorial calls, not alarm vocalizations. Something more sustained and structured than that, multiple individuals producing harmonizing tones in the dark of a cave chamber at night for no apparent survival-related purpose. We stood in the silence of the command room and listened to the mountain around us. And that was when we heard it. Not from above, not from the entrance, but from below. A sound that moved through the rock itself, a subsonic pressure change that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears, rhythmic and enormous, the sound of many heavy bodies moving through enclosed spaces simultaneously, all of them rising, the sound of 40 to 60 animals coming up from the dark. The Yeti had stopped hiding. The first one came through the ceiling. It dropped straight down through a section of tunnel roof that must have been thinned by years of water erosion, breaking through without apparent effort and landing in the tunnel 15 feet ahead of Marov with an impact that cracked the concrete floor and sent a visible shockwave through the dust on every surface in the tunnel. In the sweep of our lights, I had 1 full second to register it completely. Roughly 8 feet tall, hunched to fit the ceiling clearance, covered in dense gray-white fur, matted with cave sediment and old blood, the arms disproportionately long relative to the torso, hanging past the knee. The hands huge and dark-palmed with thick black nails rather than claws. The face was flat and heavy-browed, prognathic, with a jaw that carried a mass of musculature, visible even through the fur, and the eyes were small and amber-colored and caught the light from our headlamps with the reflective quality of deep cave adapted vision. No pupils visible, just that flat amber gleam in a face that was tracking Marov with total focused attention, the way a lion tracks a gazelle, not rage, not territorial aggression, but something colder and more absolute. Assessment. The Yeti was looking directly at Marov. Marov opened fire. The AK hit it 5 times across the chest and shoulder, and the Yeti took the impacts like body blows in a fight, staggering slightly with each one, flinching at the nearest misses where the muzzle blast would have been intense, registering the pain, absorbing it, not going down. Its fur was thick enough that 2 of the 5 rounds may not have penetrated to significant depth. It covered the 15 feet between them in 2 strides, a movement so fast it registered in my vision as a blur that my brain reconstructed into individual frames only afterward, and hit Marov with a lateral sweep of its right arm that sent him into the tunnel wall hard enough to crack the concrete, facing behind his shoulder blades. He went down in a heap, his AK clattering across the floor. The Yeti stood over him for 1 second, 1 full second, and then pivoted toward me, and I triggered the flamethrower. The fire caught its upper torso and the right side of its face, and the Yeti's response was immediate and tactical. It didn't panic. It didn't charge through the flame. It pulled back immediately with that same economic precision, reading the situation correctly, that the weapon had range and that it was currently inside that range, and retreated into the hole in the ceiling with a speed that was physically shocking given its mass, arms first, then the bulk of its body flowing upward through a gap that seemed too small for it, using the ceiling shaft with the easy facility of something that had spent its entire life moving through rock passages in the dark. Then it was gone, dust still falling. The whole encounter had lasted 11 seconds. Marov was already pulling himself upright, one hand against the cracked concrete, his shoulder at a wrong angle that he was not yet acknowledging. From below us came the sound of many others beginning to move. Faster now, the subsonic drumming of the colony rising through 5 levels of cave rock, no longer gradual, no longer patient. The tunnels became a killing floor in both directions simultaneously. The Yeti colony came upward through floor vents and ceiling drops and side passages that opened without warning, and they came fast, not in a mob, but in coordinated waves, 2 or 3 at a time, from different vectors, using the dark and the maze of the tunnel system the way any predator uses terrain it knows intimately. The coordination was what broke us tactically. We'd been thinking in terms of a single creature or even several operating independently. What we were actually facing was a colony with 40 years of experience hunting in these specific tunnels, in this specific dark. And they communicated not with calls we could hear, but with subsonic vibration that we felt in our chests as a directional rumble, the same way whales signal over distance. When a Yeti committed to an approach vector, the others adjusted. When one drew fire and withdrew, 2 more came from the flanks within seconds. Marov's team fired into charging shapes at distances of 10 feet and less, the muzzle flashes strobing the tunnel into stuttering nightmare frames of gray-white fur and amber eyes and open mouths showing flat, enormous teeth. In one flash, I would see an empty corridor. In the next, I would see a Yeti 4 feet away, mid-lunge. Researcher Fedotova died in the second assault wave, pulled through a gap in an ice wall by something that came from the other side, so fast the ice cracked like a gunshot, and she was simply no longer standing beside me. I had been touching her arm. I had my hand on her sleeve. Then my hand was on nothing, and the sleeve was gone, and the gap in the ice wall was 9 inches wide. 9 inches. I measured it afterward with my hand flat against the edges, and there was blood on the jagged ice at the margin. The Yeti on the other side had reached through its speed and closed its hand on whatever it could reach and pulled with a force that nothing with a skeleton adapted to narrow spaces should have been able to exert. I still don't understand the mechanics of it. I have thought about it every day since. Escort Burov sealed a blast door on the 3rd level to cut off a flanking approach, and a Yeti forced the door open from the other side while Burov was still bracing against the hinge mechanism, throwing its full body weight against steel rated for pressure ordnance containment. The door pinned him against the frame, and he screamed once, a short and final sound, and then the Yeti was through the door and in the tunnel with the rest of us, and Marov put it down with a burst at point-blank range, 3 rounds in the skull at a distance of 8 feet before the Yeti's body registered the damage and stopped moving, the final stride carrying it 1 more step even after the 3rd round. The burst was so close that the muzzle blast lit the Yeti's fur briefly. Burov was gone when we checked the doorframe. We didn't stop. We could not stop. The Yetis adapted to the flamethrowers within 20 minutes of first contact, and the speed of that adaptation was the most frightening thing I had encountered to that point in a sequence of experiences that had been continuously redefining what frightening meant. They started coming along the ceiling, using the overhead shafts and drops as approach vectors specifically because the flame angle was difficult to raise high enough fast enough in the confined space. One dropped directly onto Escort Volkov from a ceiling shaft, pinning him flat, and was on him for less than 3 seconds before Marov drove it back with a sustained burst. 3 seconds was enough. The Yetis also learned to send one individual as a draw, visible at the edge of the light, close enough to demand a flamethrower response, while 2 more came from ceiling drops behind the flame user during the moment of distraction. They tried this 3 times in the first 40 minutes. The first time, it nearly worked. By the 3rd time, Marov had assigned a dedicated ceiling watcher, but the ceiling was 50 feet of dark above our headlamps, and the Yetis knew exactly where the edge of useful visibility was. I heard one of them mimic a human voice in a side tunnel while we were moving through the third junction. Not words. The mouth anatomy didn't permit words, but the cadence and pitch envelope of a human scream, close enough that two of us turned toward it before Marov physically stopped us. The vocalization had been Fedotova's voice. The Yeti had heard her scream when it took her and reproduced it 60 minutes later with enough accuracy that I felt my legs stop responding briefly. The tunnel it came from showed 2 sets of Yeti tracks going in and none coming out, and we did not go in after them. The geothermal analysis had been in the journals, and Sorokin had retained it, reading quickly with a researcher's information processing instinct even in the middle of a firefight debrief. The deep vents that had sustained the colony for decades were collapsing from below. Tectonic stress, gradual but accelerating, the thermal differential that had kept the lower levels warm enough for habitation dropping toward uninhabitable. The colony wasn't attacking because we'd trespassed. The colony was migrating. They were coming up regardless of us. The mountain was pushing them to the surface, and the old Soviet containment system, the blast doors, the seals, the barriers the original team had constructed and maintained for 17 years, had been failing for 11 years since the last researchers abandoned the station. Every Yeti that came through a ceiling drop was not hunting. Every Yeti was leaving. Sorokin told me this while we ran. His voice was completely flat, the way voices get when the adrenaline has been running so long that fear stops producing a distinct signal and becomes simply the baseline condition of being alive. He told me that if the colony reached the surface and dispersed across the range, the nearest human settlement was a small town of roughly 3,200 people, 40 miles northwest. He told me this and kept running. The explosives were Soviet-era and stored in a sealed armory on the second level, and Marov knew demolitions well enough to rig a daisy chain through 3 of the main tunnel junctions in 22 minutes, while Sorokin and I held the approach with the flamethrowers. 22 minutes was a long time. A Yeti came at us from the east approach 4 minutes in, and I held the flame on it for 6 full seconds before it retreated, the smell of burning fur and the Yeti's screaming filling the tunnel with a sound that was distressingly close to something human. A second Yeti came from above, dropping into the middle of the east approach, and then a third appeared at the edge of our light behind it, and a fourth beyond that, shapes filling in the darkness at the edge of visibility, too many to count, watching us with those amber eyes that caught and held the light. They were waiting. They had learned the range of the flamethrowers in the first assault, and they were staying outside it, holding position, not rushing because they didn't need to rush. There were too many of them, and they had all the time they needed. The tunnel smelled of singed fur and old blood and cave rock, and Sorokin stood beside me, breathing hard and steady, keeping his flame angled at the ceiling junction above the second Yeti, and I kept mine on the east approach, and neither of us spoke because there was nothing useful to say. Marov came back. He had the detonator, and he had an RPK gun he'd pulled from the armory, a drum-fed machine gun with 600 rounds of belt in a bag over his shoulder. He looked at the shapes massing in the east approach. I counted at least 7 distinct sets of amber eyes at the edge of our light, and there were sounds from the ceiling above us that suggested more positioned overhead. And he looked at us, and he told us to run. He told us the tunnel leading to the surface exit was clear. He'd come back up it. It was about 400 yards northeast and rising at roughly a 30-degree grade. He told us the exit came out on the ridge at 9,600 feet. He said there should be enough collapse in the demolition to seal the primary junctions and close the main migration routes, that the daisy chain he'd laid would bring down enough tunnel ceiling mass to block the 5 largest vertical shafts simultaneously. He said should because that was the honest answer. I started to say something, and Marov shook his head once, a single sharp movement that meant we were done negotiating this. He sat down cross-legged in the middle of the tunnel with the RPK across his knees and his back to us, facing the east approach and the amber eyes beyond. He set the detonator on the ground beside his right knee where his hand could reach it. He had maybe a minute before the Yetis at the edge of the light understood that the flame was not present and came in. He was giving us those 60 seconds at the cost of everything he had left. He said it one more time, quietly, without turning around. Run. I ran. Sorokin was already ahead of me. I heard the RPK open up behind me as I hit the northeast tunnel junction, the sustained mechanical hammering of a full drum at cyclic rate, and I heard the Yetis screaming. That sound, that wrongly human sound. And I heard the tunnel walls transmitting vibration that I felt in my feet and my teeth. And then the first detonation came, and the tunnel behind me flexed like something alive, and the ceiling dropped a sheet of rock the size of a dining table 6 feet behind my heels, and I kept running. The second detonation hit while I was still in the northeast passage, and the shockwave pushed me physically, a wall of displaced air at high pressure that slapped me into the left wall and bounced me off, and I kept running. The RPK had gone silent. The third, fourth, and fifth detonations came in a rolling chain that I felt more than heard, the rock of the mountain absorbing and transmitting the energy in every direction at once. The tunnel cracking above me, water and ice suddenly sheeting down through new fissures in the ceiling, and I kept running. The passage narrowed toward the top and angled up sharply enough that I was using my hands on the walls for leverage. The floor slick with seepage, the ceiling low enough in the final 30 feet that I was bent nearly double and moving by feel. As much as sight, because my headlamp had taken a hit from the wall collision and was flickering in and out. I came out of the exit onto the open ridge into cold so absolute, after the compressed heat of the tunnels, that it felt like hitting water. The blizzard fully developed, and screaming horizontal snow at 30 miles an hour. The stars gone. Visibility maybe 40 feet in the beam of the lamp. Sorokin was ahead of me in the exit tunnel. The passage angled up steeply and narrowed toward the top, the walls wet with seepage, the floor uneven with years of water-laid sediment. The sound from below had become a continuous roar, the RPK and the Yetis and the mountain itself under some new stress. And then the detonation came. Not a single blast, but a rolling chain of them, the tunnel flexing under me, the ceiling dropping dust and small rocks in a curtain that thickened into falling fist-sized chunks of stone. I ran with my arms over my head, and I didn't look back, and I didn't stop, and then I was out, stumbling through the exit into the open air of the ridge at just after 2 in the morning, the cold hitting me like a wall, the stars gone behind cloud cover, the blizzard that had been building for hours now at full intensity around me. Sorokin was already on the radio. He'd had a backup unit on his person, the one piece of equipment the Yeti hadn't managed to take from us, and he was transmitting on the emergency frequency, giving our coordinates, giving the ridge marker number from the Soviet-era post we were standing next to. The mountain below us shook 3 more times in succession, deep and structural, the snow on the ridgeline shaking loose in small cascades. Then it went quiet. The RPK had been silent for a while already. We waited in the wind for 40 minutes before we heard the helicopter. It came in low and fast, a military search and rescue model running a spotlight, and it found us on the first pass and set down 40 yards west on a flat section of the ridge. The crew chief was out before the skids fully stopped, and he was moving toward us with a thermal blanket, and he was saying something about warming packs and base camp, and Sorokin grabbed my arm and turned me east. Through the blizzard, maybe 3 miles out across the range, on the face of a different mountain entirely, a mountain we had not been near, a mountain the Soviet records had never mentioned, a mountain that appeared on no map we'd been given. There were shapes moving. I could see them in the helicopter spotlights bleed off, the way the ambient light caught motion at the periphery of visibility. Not one shape, not two. Many shapes, large and pale against the dark rock face, moving downward through the storm, unhurried, steady, moving toward the surface. The Yeti colony beneath our mountain had been one of many.